thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm Anna Palmer, the CEO and one of the founders of Punchbowl News, joined by Jake Sherman, another founder of Punchbowl News. We are very excited for this pop-up conversation. It could not be timelier, Jake.
No. We love chips. We love this bill. So we don't love the bill. We love the process.
He's obsessed with chips, so he's very excited to be here this morning to talk about the chip shortage with Commerce Deputy Secretary Don Graves. Afterwards, this is going to be followed by a conversation with Dario Gill from IBM, who has been here working on this issue, Senior Vice President and Director of Research at IBM. Just a quick reminder, we'd love for you to share about this conversation for those in person and joining us on the live stream on your social media platforms. You can find Punchbowl News on all social media platforms at Punchbowl News. And with that, we're going to welcome Mr. Graves to the stage. Thank you so much.
Chips, chips, chips.
Absolutely.
All right, Jake, you want to kick it off here?
Yeah, I guess much to my chagrin, we'll start with some news of the day questions and then get into chips. I could spend an hour talking about chips alone. Economy. Obviously, this is something you're involved with. The Commerce Department, as we were just talking backstage, the Commerce Department is in the middle of literally everything right now. Russia, Ukraine, chips, economy, supply chain.
Climate.
Just a few things on your ticket there.
Fed meeting this week, potential raise of interest rates. Give me your thoughts about what that would mean for the economy.
The Fed needs to continue to do what they need to do to keep the economy both moving along, but also keep inflation in check. So I expect that the chair will be able to manage that effectively. We're focused on making sure that the economy continues to move forward. We've seen great momentum. I know there's a lot of talk about the R word.
The R word.
Yeah, that's
recession. Recession, for those of you who are not aware.
But, frankly, the economy has outpaced, I think, every expert's expectations over the course of the last year and a half. We've gotten Americans back working again. We're continuing to create jobs, essentially 400,000 new jobs every month, which is really unprecedented for this period of time. So we still feel very strongly that the economy is going to keep moving along, that businesses continue to invest, Americans continue to spend. That's not the issue. The issue, obviously, is keeping inflation down and also dealing with the supply chain challenges that we're facing across the globe.
Let's talk about that R word. President Biden
recession.
Yesterday said, I don't think we're going to see a recession. Are we headed toward a recession, or do you think we're already in one? There's a lot of debate here about what that would mean for the economy. Is this a big problem for Democrats going into the midterms?
Well, look, Americans are feeling it, certainly feeling the effects. And the president is very clear-eyed. It keeps him up at night, worrying about how people are going to be able to afford the food that they have to buy at the grocery store to keep their family fed, worried about the cost of gas at the pump to be able to get to their jobs, take their parents to their health care, to get their kids to and from school or camp. So it's something that the president is focused on every day. It's why the president has been pushing Congress to remove the gas tax, to give us a gas tax holiday, to provide as much petroleum into the system as we can to get those gas prices down. And we've seen a decrease in prices, nearly 40 cents over the last month or so. It's starting to have an effect. People are actually feeling like they can keep going again. But part of this is also out of our control a bit. Certainly we had the challenge of the pandemic and the global supply chain issues. And even more so is Putin's unwarranted war, the invasion of Ukraine, the attack on the Ukrainian people. That's had a direct impact on the price of gas at the pump. It's about $1.50 of increased prices at the pump since the war started. So that's actually perhaps the biggest challenge that we have. But we as free and democratic peoples, we have to stand with those who have our shared values and make sure that Vladimir Putin doesn't go unpunished for this war of choice that he's engaged with the Ukrainian people.
Let's move to chips. So
the fewest news of the day questions we've ever had at a punch.
well, we have 1,000 chips questions, and we love this chips process. So the chips bill that that the Senate is going to consider today, a procedural vote, includes $54 billion in support for the semiconductor industry, domestic semiconductor production, related tax breaks, a science title, so research development incentives to have research and development in this country, including tech hubs all over the country and lots of other things. I guess the opening question for me, I mean, this is 11 o'clock today in the Senate. We'll be covering it. Tune into C-SPAN. I guess my first question to you is, give us a sense of what we're going to see and the timeline in which we're going to see this bill get implemented, and when companies like IBM, Intel, I mean, all these companies all around the country that are going to invest in the U.S., when we're going to see that come to fruition.
Well, Jake, it's a great question. And let me just make sure that everyone has the same foundation understanding of chips. I know you've been spending a lot of time on chips, Jake. It's his favorite thing. But for those that don't know, chips are essential to everything that we do in life. They're in our phones, they're in our cars, they're in our appliances. They make sure that we have lights, that we have live feeds. They're in our farm equipment, our business equipment. They are essential to everything. The U.S. produces 12% of the chips worldwide, only 12%. We used to be the world's leaders in chips. We produce none of the most advanced chips, the chips that power the most highly technological devices, our military equipment, the things that we need, excuse me, to be able to compete going forward. So it's absolutely essential for us to get this passed. But excuse me, to your question, just the passage will have a profound impact on the companies that are investing in the semiconductor ecosystem. We know that a number of companies have made commitments to invest in the United States simply because they believe that Congress is going to get this legislation passed. We saw Intel with a $20 billion investment in Ohio earlier this year.
Which has been paused because Congress has slowed.
Exactly. And the challenge that we have is that they're going to hold off on those investments. They are being wooed by countries all around the globe. $150 billion has been spent by China in the last few years to increase their semiconductor production. The Europeans are committed to making $30 to $50 billion of investments in that ecosystem. So we need this now, and I think just the passage and signing by the president will signal that the U.S. is committed to making sure that we're rebuilding that ecosystem.
Secretary Raimondo and yourself, you guys, commerce has really been the tip of the spear for the administration here. Yes, I think a week or so ago, she basically called it a national security imperative over the weekend to get this done. Can you give us some more insight on that? I know that there's been, some security conversations on the Hill, that's been pretty convincing to some members to actually get this across the finish line.
Well, like I said, you have our competitors across the globe who are spending hundreds of billions of dollars to essentially steal away the semiconductor industry, to be able to build the types of chips that we hope to build. And that means that they're going to have that technological advantage if we don't act soon. We also know that there are countries that are trying to steal our technology, that are stealing our intellectual property. And part of what we're trying to do is both offense and defense. We certainly need to continue to drive research and development, and that's what the CHIPS Act and all the other pieces of this legislation will help us to do. It'll help us drive innovation. We are the world's leaders on research and development in chips, and that will help us continue to outpace the rest of the world. But we're not the leaders in all other parts of the ecosystem, and that's what we need to do. You couple that with the defensive work that we do at the Commerce Department, making sure that we're protecting our exports, protecting our technology, and working with our allies and partners around the world to protect their technological advantages as well. That's what we have to do in concert, and that's what this legislation is going to do.
You know, one of the pain points in this process has been, you know, let's reverse for a second. The Senate passed a bill last summer. House has passed a number of bills which stood no chance of becoming law, and then they entered into a negotiation, which was fruitless, to be honest with you, and a bunch of Democratic priorities and Republican priorities have dropped out of this bill. Climate provisions, labor provisions, trade provisions. The three most important things, trade to Republicans, climate, and labor to Democrats, have dropped out. I'm curious if it's this administration's priority to try to make another run at some of these things, or is this really the only bite at the apple?
Well, we have to prioritize getting chips passed, which we will do this week.
Yeah,
and then my expectation is that that Congress will move very quickly to try and pass some of these other priorities, like same-sex marriage protection. As someone who has LGBTQ members of my family, I want them to have the same rights that I do. It's something that I think is fundamental and something that a free society like ours should believe in. But we also know, as the president has said, that the climate crisis is existential. So whatever we can't get done in this legislation, our expectation is that there will be other things that we'll try to push through in September. But that doesn't mean that that we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. So we can pass the CHIPS bill, and we can try to get some of these other critical pieces of legislation across the finish line as well.
Critics of this bill, including pretty loudly Senator Bernie Sanders, have called it a huge government giveaway to very profitable companies. How do you respond to that criticism? And are there guardrails to kind of protect against that?
Well, I fundamentally disagree with that proposition, and I like Senator Sanders a lot. The thing that we have to remember is that if these companies saw the ability to build these chips in the U.S. without these incentives, they'd be building them here. But that's not the case. They're building them in Taiwan, in Korea, in Japan, some in Europe. So we need to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to bring more of that ecosystem back to the United States. The other thing that we're doing is making sure that there are guardrails, there are protections against lining the pockets of CEOs, of senior executives. We have to make sure that the senior executives aren't getting access, aren't using these funds unfettered, that we're making sure that they're living up to their end of the bargain, that when they make a commitment for construction, that they're being held accountable to the deadlines, and if they aren't, we'll claw back the money, that they aren't able to use these resources to invest in other countries,
right,
protecting the dollars so that we're focused on building manufacturing jobs here in the United States, good paying, high quality, family sustaining jobs here in the U.S. And it's not just about the engineers or PhDs at the fabs. It's a whole range of jobs, including construction jobs. So we need that in the United States. And as I said before, these chips power every industry. It's not just about making sure that we're growing the semiconductor industry. It's also about making sure that all of the other industries, manufacturing, where we're building other equipment and components, where they use chips, this makes sure that they can keep going. It's like the automakers. Last year, we saw several of the automakers slow down production or have to stop production altogether for some of their lines because they didn't have access to chips. If we can make sure that we're building more of the chips here, we can keep people employed, we can build more things here in the United States, and we can also keep inflation in check. So the last thing I'll say on this is that last year, 1/3 of the increase in inflation was directly tied to automakers not having chips. So they couldn't produce cars, people couldn't buy the cars, and so that increased inflationary pressure as a result of the demand for those cars.
So let's talk about, this is going to pass the Senate likely today, the House, I would imagine. hopefully before the end of the week, as far as you guys are concerned. Let's talk about the next steps here. Some of the spending is mandatory, means it is going out the door, kind of baked in. Some of it is discretionary, so it's subject to congressional appropriations, which is being at the whim of Congress is something you guys are going to have fun with. I wondered twofold. I mean, talk about that process, and what is Commerce's role now going forward to kind of implement this bill?
Well, the good thing is that we've spent a lot of time talking with Congress, talking with industry, so we have a fairly good understanding of where I think they're going to be. We've certainly been talking to the appropriators, and we talk to them all the time anyway because
they control your budget.
Exactly. So I think we have a fairly good idea of where they are. We also put out a request for information earlier this year, or actually it was last year, to get input from industry about what the CHIPS programs should look like. So we're using that information to help guide us around how we implement the portion of the legislation that Commerce, assuming that Congress does their job, that we will have in our control. So that includes the ways that we look at the entire ecosystem. It's not just about giving money to some companies so they can build fabs. It's making sure, as I said, that the entire ecosystem, from research and development to the tool makers, the design, the fabs, the fabless, the advanced packaging, and everything in between, we have to make sure that we have the critical components of the ecosystem here in the United States. And that's what we're going to do very, very quickly. We can't wait. We have to make sure that we're getting this program implemented as quickly as possible.
Building off of that, can you talk a little bit about your vision or Commerce's vision for the National Semiconductor Technology Center, its innovation hub? There's been a lot of talk about it, a lot of interested parties about where that's going to be located, how it's going to be done. What's your perspective?
Well, I don't want to get out in front of Congress and what they are going to finalize in the legislation. But we've spent a lot of time thinking about the National Semiconductor Technology Center and its need. Clearly, we have to have more research and development. We have to have the innovation driven here in the United States, and that's what the NSTC will allow us to do. I'm not going to talk about where it might be located or how we might choose what that will look like, but needless to say that the team has spent a huge amount of time thinking it through, talking with industry, talking with universities, talking with our friends and allies around the world about the ways that we can drive innovation here in the United States to make sure that, again, we have the ecosystem in the U.S.
There's a powerful senator from New York, Chuck Schumer, I don't know if you've heard of him, who has indicated that upstate...
What was his name again?
Charles E. Schumer has indicated that upstate New York might be a fine place to build such an expansive facility. What are your thoughts on that?
There are a lot of great places in this country to build the National Semiconductor Technology Center. I happen to have taken a really great trip to New York with the majority leader, but I also spent a lot of time in a certain state that begins with an O and is high in the middle. No, I'm not going to suggest that we actually have any plans for where we're going to build it just yet. We're going to go through a process. It will be a balanced process that will include a lot of input from regions around the country. I expect that there will be many places that will be asking for, applying for the right to be able to host the NSTC.
We were talking about this a little bit backstage, and I think we'll probably wrap on this. Or maybe not. Maybe Anna's looking at me
We'll
like
see.
I'm crazy.
I don't know where you're going here.
No, it's been interesting to me that there's been some odd bedfellows here. Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State and Director of the CIA, who also served in the House of Representatives, has been urging passage of this bill. Robert O'Brien, former National Security Advisor to Donald Trump, has been urging passage of this bill. I mean, you rarely especially between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, see this level of almost cooperation. And I know we've reported that Secretary Raimondo has spoken to Pompeo and has been coordinating his message or coordinating with him. I don't know precisely what they've been talking about, but on his calls to members of Congress. It's been really interesting to see that. I mean, do you have any observations about that?
Well, I think it goes to show that this is something that everyone agrees needs to be done. This is one of those rare things that actually is widely bipartisanly, if that's a word.
We'll allow it.
It is agreed upon that we need these investments today. We need the investments as soon as possible. We need to rebuild the ecosystem. We've seen over the last 2 years when we don't have critical supplies like semiconductors, we're going to have real problems in this country. So it's a national security and an economic security imperative. And so everyone is agreeing, one of the few times, that we need to get this done as quickly as possible.
I want to just ask one forward-looking question, because I know you're focused on the day-to-day right now, just getting through the week, getting this bill passed, and then there's the implementation process. But there's been a lot of kind of, if you look to the future, how can we not have this problem happen again, right? This is solving a problem that has clearly been manifesting itself for years. But what have you learned through this process? Is there going to be future legislation that's going to be needed, future money that's going to be needed?
Well, it's a really great question. It's something
I
that
agree. It is a really good question.
Thanks, guys.
Anna, would you like to answer? No, we've spent a lot of time thinking about this issue, and it's not just about semiconductors, though that's the important issue of the day, but it's a whole range of parts of the supply chain that clearly we have issues. We've had issues over the last couple of years. It's why we actually went out and did a study on supply chains to really understand where we had critical places of challenge, where there are potential chokeholds that other countries could use against us. Hopefully, if Congress wills it, that we'll have an Office of Supply Chain Resilience, and we'll be able to spend some time looking specifically at this issue on a going forward basis so that we can look around the bend a little bit to understand where there are going to be challenges going forward. Regardless of whether it's included in this legislation or not, the Commerce Department is leading an effort across the administration to try and do that, to get ahead of industry, get ahead of where we're going to have real problems going forward, whether it's semiconductors, critical minerals, or what have you. There are these real challenges that for national security and economic security issues, we need to be much more thoughtful and proactive than we've done before. And it's something, frankly, that industry can't do on its own. It just doesn't have the ability to make bets or think about what's going to be coming 10, 20 years from now because they're so focused on today. And that's really where the federal government, working with partners, can come in and help sort of create more balance.
All right. Well, Deputy Secretary Graves, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank
we
you, sir.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. All right. Now I'd like to welcome Dario Gill, SVP and Director of Research at IBM, to the stage for another fireside chat. Welcome back.
A return customer, Dario Gill.
We sat a few months ago, I think. We sat down talking about Usika, chips, or now we're calling it Chips Plus. That's where we've landed.
Call it whatever you want. It's going to get passed, right?
The latest iteration. It was far from a sure thing when we sat down the last time ago. It's closer than ever before. Can you talk about we heard the Deputy Secretary talk about it, but the importance from your perspective of this bill passing first the Senate and then the House?
Well, it's critical because, as Deputy Secretary Graves mentioned, chips technology is the foundation of the modern digital economy. But it's also this moment that we find ourselves is the opportunity to drive a revival of the United States semiconductor technology. We should remember that this is a technology that the United States invented.
Good point.
The industry was created in the United States. And the industry relies on two crucial dynamics. One is innovation, like one of the greatest marvels of technological sophistication are chips themselves, from the materials to the fabrication technology. It's just one of the great frontiers of technology. and the other one is manufacturing. I think we continue to have very good strengths in R&D, although we've got to continue to double down on that. But the manufacturing base has eroded tremendously, right? From about 37% in 1990 to about 12% today. And on the advanced chips, the ones that are going to power self-driving vehicles and artificial intelligence and so on, we manufacture zero. So I think this moment, we will come to see it as a moment of revival and a very important down payment, a moment where we signal, right, to ourselves, through the commitment and investments, that we wanted to turn things around. I think the other thing I will mention that is very interesting in the moment is that there's also a coordinated international push. You're seeing, I don't think I've ever witnessed this before in science and technology policy, the fact that you're going to see simultaneous or almost simultaneous pieces of legislation in the United States, in Europe, in Japan, where it's not going to be portrayed by and large as a zero-sum game, but rather that a coordinated sort of like allies action can return or sort of like transform the trend that we've seen eroding over time.
You meant this leads us into the next question here, which is, so if all these countries are passing legislation at the same time, why does Chips Plus, or what? Well, I guess we'll call it Chips Plus. What makes America more attractive to a company to build chips than a Japan or a South Korea, or why America? Is, I guess, the best question.
Well, first, it's a great market, right? Largest consumer of chips in the world, vibrant market. It has an extraordinary innovation ecosystem around that. And I think the connection also that we have seen in terms of secure supply chains and national security, it gives you also a strong signal that chips and advanced chips manufactured in America are likely to be, right, important or preferred choices in the future for these critical industries or areas that depend on national security or secure supply chains. So, but to answer also the question, this is a fast-growing industry. So about the industry global scale is about $560 billion. By all accounts, by 2030, it's going to be $1 trillion industry. So this is not an industry that is based on scarcity. It's an industry where the need for chips is going to continue to increase dramatically, and we're going to see growing markets in the United States, in the Americas, in Europe, around the world. So I think that that's part of the attractiveness. There is room for many.
We heard the Deputy Secretary kind of punt on where the potential Semiconductor Innovation Center, Technology Center should be. IBM is a member of the American Semiconductor Innovation Coalition. Talk about what that is for folks in the audience who don't know what it is, and what are you hoping is going to happen as it relates to the Technology Center?
Because this process of passing chips actually started almost 2 years ago, so it's been a journey. And,
tell me about it.
Yeah. And so as a result of that, the positive spin of that is that the industry and related institutions have had plenty of time.
Had a lot of time to think about it.
To think about it and how to form coalitions. So ASIC, the American Semiconductor Innovation Coalition, is an example of that, where there's 100 institutions of leading companies and universities all over the United States and startups who have come together to think through two things. I mean, A, advocate for the passage of the CHIPS Act, but more importantly, start organizing ourselves around what is the research agenda that we got to put forth. How will we form coalitions of excellence around? So if you look at potential NSTC implementations, what you're going to see is likely some geographical distribution. You will see also topical areas like memory or logic or electronic design automation or packaging technology. And you will see that coalitions form around each one of those domains. And for example, in that context, in logic, which is the basis of the transistor technology that pushes the limits, you're seeing, for example, a coalition around Albany Nanotech and so on. Why is that important? Because I think we've got to leverage the infrastructure that exists in the nation. If you look at a facility like Albany, that is the result of 20 years of investment, $15 billion of capital. If we want to have a sense of urgency, we got to leverage what we have, as opposed to imagining creating a brand new center starting from scratch. That will take many, many years.
And having people move there, and I mean, that's a big hurdle, right?
It takes a long time, I mean, because you rely on the human capital, on the infrastructure, and these elements are in it. So that's what you're starting to see. Actually, industry and others starting to coalesce and organize themselves to be, proactive on how do we stand up the NSTC in 6 months as opposed to in years.
Very interesting. Let's talk about the cybersecurity implications here, which are humongous. The case, aside from economics, the case has been made about national security, about how this is important for the U.S.'s standing in the world and national security. Put some meat on the bones there. I mean, there is a tremendous national security argument here on top of economic, correct?
Actually, there may end up being a central argument in the end, right? Because, as we mentioned, the fact that we don't make the most advanced semiconductors here in the United States and the dependency that we have in the military, in the intelligence community, you name it, is it's not an overstatement to say that it's existential. And if you look at then the geopolitical dimension of the likelihood that we will face some kind of conflict or a situation in Taiwan where like 70, 80% of the most advanced chips are made over whatever horizon you choose to think. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. But it's likely going to be a situation where it is more than prudent to diversify your production around this. So it is an existential issue. And I was hearing the comments. I think the briefings that took place in Congress just in the last couple of weeks from Secretary Raimondo and others around some of the implications of what happens if there's a disruption on semiconductors. Where are we using them? Some of the security dimensions of the fabrication process itself, I think it's really reawakening a lot of eyes. It's a brutal reality, and what we got to do is start taking corrective action. But the issue is very real, and I'm glad that you frame it that way, because there is an economic implication, but the national security one is really fundamental and existential.
And that's what brought a lot of Republicans around. Go ahead, Anna.
All right, we're going to end on this, because I think there was a lot of question about whether funding for the National Science Foundation was actually going to make it in the final bill. It wasn't in the original kind of Schumer legislation, that when it was really pared back, it has now been added. I would love for your perspective on why is that important, and then kind of project in the same way that we had Deputy Secretary Graves in terms of the future of this. Where is this going? This isn't the end, but I mean, this seems to me that this is going to be an issue that's going to be kind of perennial in some ways.
Look, the NSF, the National Science Foundation, it's an agency that needs a lot more love in our country. Let me tell you that, number one.
Spoken like a true researcher.
Yeah, well, I'll also, a disclaimer, I serve on the National Science Board, right? So it starts with the thing. But let me make the argument of why it is. Because fundamentally, it is the STEM talent agency of the nation, right? And what it does, it supports the graduate students, the undergraduate, and it supports the basic university fabric of doing research and development. So it was extremely important that it was included in this CHIPS Plus. There are provisions already within it around training and curricular programs for semiconductor technology that the NSF will be responsible for doing it. But I think one of the things that I do urge Congress to act in terms when we get to appropriations is that for the first time, NSF in 30 years is creating a new directorate called the Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. And the flagship program is to create regional innovation engines, which are going to be hubs of technology around the nation. And just to give you a sense of the interest that there is, when the first call for proposals have gone out, like just recent data that is going to be coming out in MAPS this week from NSF, over 800 proposals have come in from everywhere around the nation. And 40% of the participants on these proposals had never submitted any grants for NSF in the past. So it's about expanding who gets to participate on this one. Now, this is an authorization for NSF on doing that, but I do think it's incredibly important that the TIP directorate gets funded appropriately by Congress, because it's the other side of the equation. We're talking about manufacturing incentives for semiconductors, R&D agenda. This is the talent component that we need, and that investment that NSF makes is absolutely crucial for our future.
All right, with that, we're going to leave it there. Dario, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate. Thanks all of you for joining us in person and on the live stream, and of course to Deputy Secretary Graves for taking the time on this very busy morning. Just want to remind everybody, tomorrow morning I'm going to be doing a virtual event with Representative Eric Swalwell, the Democrat of California, at 9 a.m. looking at privacy, security, technology. It's going to be a really interesting way to end our July events. Thanks so much, and have a great day, and stay safe.